Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. My name is James Batchelor. Now, we're well into the second half of the year, and it's a good time to look back and indeed look forwards at what the rest of the year has in store. Joining me for this is Auto Trader's Head of Strategy and Insights, Mark Palmer. Hello, Mark.
Hello, James. Hello, everybody.
Always good to have you on, Mark. I always feel as though we don't have you on enough, actually, so I'm glad you're here today.
I don't hear that very often.
But yeah, it's good to have you on, and I've got plenty to ask you. Now, as I mentioned in my intro, we're well into the second half of the year now. I mean, time really does fly. So, based on what you can see in your data, how is the used car market holding up at the moment?
A good question and a good one to reflect on. So we're about halfway into the year, aren't we? Just over halfway into the year, aren't we? And right now, or in the first kind of 7, 8 months, what we've seen is a robust used car market, especially in terms of sales. So we've had returning supply through the year in various pockets, post the big drop in supply. And we always knew that was going to be the case. And of course, the questions for us coming into 2024 were, is the market going to perform as strongly as it has in the last couple of years? Are we going to see the transaction volumes that we saw? Are we going to see the sort of speed of sale that we've seen over the last couple of years? And all that is dependent, of course, on demand. So, and happy to report that the market has been performing really well. What we're predicting now for the rest of the year, or for 2024, is the market will probably be about 5% up in terms of transactions, landing 7.6 million used car sales. So a positive picture. You might have thought, we've got to remember where we've gone. We've add some context to it. You've got to remember, of course, that we've had a couple of years of lower volumes, very short supply in different pockets, all that sort of things. Things have come back much more to normal, much more supply coming into the market, but transaction volumes have been returning at the sort of speed and sort of volume that we would really, really want.
So of course, there's still those lost registrations, isn't there? Which I know Auto Trader has spoken a lot about, and that must still be feeling the effects of that.
Oh, that will be a factor in the market for probably for almost for the balance of the decade, I would think. And once they're gone, of course, they're gone, which we've spoken about
Mm.
an awful lot with you and with listeners before, and that will be the case. And I mean, really, the kind of summary of that, of course, is that it affects different ages of cars at different points in time. Immediately, we saw very, very few 0 to 1 year old cars. Then that sort of after a year or so starts to impact 1 to 3. We're now starting to see it in the 3, 4, 5
Yeah.
cohort of cars, and then, of course, as the rest starts to replenish, it will then go towards 10. We'll start to see fewer older used cars. So that will really flow through the market, and it will be affecting what supply is available and what there is to buy for quite a while.
Mm. So what about retail used car prices at the moment? I mean, what are the trends that you're seeing in your data?
It's been a really interesting year, and again, we saw a real kind of a real disconnect at the end of last year between trade pricing and retail pricing. We saw that drop in trade prices, didn't we? And then we saw some retailers holding at retail values. But other retailers not doing so, and generally, there was that was pulling retail prices down. Retailers were kind of thinking, well, hang on a minute, I have got these trade prices going down. Is the market under some pressure here? They start to pull their retail pricing down. Maybe they're not pricing retail back, or maybe they're just worried about the value of the stock that they've got and what it's going to do at the back end of 2023, and that then pulls the rest of the market down. And we were kind of trying to counsel against that a little bit, saying, look, whatever's happening in trade, demand is still there for these cars. They're still selling quickly. There's still demand. There's still a lot of appetite out there with drivers. So you don't need to pull retail prices down because trade has been going down. The force kind of took care of itself a little bit. Retail prices did come down, and they came down for a few months, actually, well into 2024. What we've seen over the last few months is that sort of stabilized. So much more of a, much more of a kind of leveling off in the charts. Pricing seems to have settled down, and that's better. Obviously, that's better news. What we didn't want is we don't want any panic or anything like that. Didn't need it. While supply has been returning, it's still been doing it in pockets, and of course, demand has still remain really solid. So that seems to have stabilized. Which is really good news.
Mm. Yeah, and I think because I remember talking to you a lot about the that disconnect between trade and retail and trade prices towards the end of 2023. I mean, they dropped like 10.5% in the last 3 months of 23. So, and I think that's played out this year. It's got a lot better. The price drops are much smaller, so that realignment has sort of worked its way through now. So from a retail perspective, it all sounds pretty positive, I think it's fair to say. There must be some challenges ahead, though. Would you agree?
Yeah, you would think so. Yeah, I get, and the challenge I think is still, I mean, there are operational challenges for retailers. You've just kind of touched on that slightly there. At the back end of last year, we will have had, and retailers will be going into budget, of course, very soon when we look forward to 2025 and thinking about, what kind of volumes can I expect? What's going to happen with my facilities, my energy bills and salaries and all those other things, all that stuff to contend with at the same time as you've got industry themes and challenges. As I said, what put really simply, demand is good and solid. Now there are obviously ups and downs within that, and some retailers will be feeling different effects versus others. But at a general market aggregated level, demand is robust and solid. The challenge is, aside from all the operational ones we've just talked about with prep costs and people and everything else, is still going to be in supply because, as I've mentioned, some are going to come, some cars are coming back quicker than others, some types of cars coming back quicker than others, some not. The important thing as well, which we've talked about quite a bit, is that the returning supply, as the market gets replenished, the returning supply is different. And there are two factors in there which are worth calling out for retailers. And number one is the one that we talk about an awful lot, which is electric cars. Increasingly, of the returning supply, more and more of them are going to be electric, simply because now 1 in 6, 1 in 7 new cars sold over the last 2-3 years now are electric. As they come off fleets or as they get returned from a PCP agreement or whatever else, or and signs of pre-registration, which I'll come to in a moment, then there obviously you go to bring in some stock, and a lot more of it is electric than it used to be. So there's number one. If you've not sold electric cars before, you don't know much about them. Increasingly, what you can see is available to sell is going to be electric. Number two is that the impact of the drop in new car and therefore the hit on used supply down the line isn't equal across all the brands. So we say quite big numbers, 2.5 million new car sales lost. Now that didn't happen at the same rate for every brand that's out there. So just to call some out, we're predicting that in the park, over different periods of time, different brands will see fewer cars in the park. The biggest one of those, one of the biggest brands, of course, if not the biggest brand in the UK over time, has been Ford. In end of this year, there will be 730,000 fewer Fords in the park than there were in 2019. About 500,000 fewer Vauxhalls, about 350,000 fewer Mercedes-Benz cars. So the impact of that new car drop was different from brand to brand. So and the reason I mention that is because if you're a retailer that sells certain types of cars, you're used to selling, let's say, 3 or 4 year old Ford vehicles and so on. There are going to be loads less of them. Now, there's a flip side to that because some brands have sold a lot more cars than they used to. There are newer brands like Tesla and MG Motors, for example, that are just everything is new, isn't it? It's additives. That's great. Others came out of it much better than some other brands. So brands like Kia, Hyundai, for example, managed to hold some volume in there. That was good. So they're in a better position. So there's the factor of electrification. Then there's a change in the brands, the stuff that's available with different badges on the front, of course. And then the last thing, I just touched on it there, is pre-registration. So the new car market, once again, is having a real impact on the used car market. Because whilst used is looking healthy and strong, and we think the transactions will be up 5%, new retail is really struggling. So if you're a franchise retailer out there, you know this already. What that's doing is it's driving some manufacturer push behavior. We are back to the old-fashioned push market that we would have been used to back pre-2020. There's a lot more pre-registration or short cycle volume in the market, which means that there's loads more younger used cars coming through. Nowhere near the volumes it was in 2019, but even still, that's definitely ticking up. So 3 factors there, and they will present challenges mainly around supply and sourcing for retailers.
And also when it comes to new EVs, I think we're probably going to be seeing even more discounting, aren't we? So because manufacturers have got to hit certain targets, haven't they? So I think that's going to be probably a challenge towards the end of the year. But I'll come back to electric cars in a minute,
Yep.
about used EVs in a second. I just want to touch upon, with everything you were saying just there, I mean, what do you think retailers should really be doing and focusing and concentrating on for the rest of the year?
I think retailers, I mean, first of all, the start point is that supply is never going to be the same again.
Yeah.
So given that demand is pretty good, given that pricing has settled down, you've got to be thinking, right, what am I going to do? How am I going to stock my forecourt going forward? And really the start point is it's never going to be the same as it was before for some of the reasons I've just mentioned. So that really means just taking a step back. And you would expect me to say this as the auto trader person who looks at insights. It is really about assessing what your local market is looking like, what it's really looking for, what does it want, and it might be slightly different to what you were used to. We talk quite a lot with retailers about insight and instincts. So instincts are really valuable. There's so much experience in the industry and so much experience within retailers, of course. But that now needs some help, and more help than it's probably had in the past. And we're obviously big advocates of using insights for that. Tons of our retailer partners are really using insights to do this. So I would say that taking that step back, thinking quite strategically about 2025, has my market changed now that things have settled down? There is demand. What's it for? What kind of cars are going to sell at what sort of prices? And do I need to adjust my stocking policies in order to make sure I've got the right stuff that's going to sell pretty quickly? That would be the start point. Use the data to help. There's loads of data out there. Use that to help. But that would be the first thing. Really think strategically about what needs to be done for next year.
Right, finally, I just want to talk about used EV prices. I mean, what has been the theme throughout most of 2024 from your data? And importantly, I mean, what are your expectations for used EV prices for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so there are two things within used EVs. First thing to say, volumes are up, sales volumes are up, supply is up, but sales volumes are well ahead, 50-60% of where they were year on year. So used EVs at that sort of level, that market level, are selling at more volume, and they are also in certain pockets selling faster or as quickly as petrol and diesel cars. So our measures are, are they selling? Are the volumes going up? How quickly are they selling? Those are two measures to sort of look at. Is the demand good? Now, of course, and those two things are positive. Of course, some of that will be down to the fact that pricing has really changed. We've seen a big drop-offs in pricing over the last year or so, haven't we? Which has really impacted EVs, and that's had a bit of a pull on the wider market. What we're now seeing in the used market, there are clearly two stories. Vehicles aged sort of 4, 5, 6 years old, and we're not really into 8, 9, 10-year-old EVs at the moment, but certainly 4, 5, 6 years old, have reached a point at which they're at about the same in many cases, and in some cases cheaper than their petrol equivalent. So for the buyer, great news. I can get an EV for the same price as the ICE, and if I can charge that car at home, I'm going to save quite a lot of money. Next question for the buyer might be, is my EV, given that it has had a bit of depreciation, is it going to lose more money? Is it going to drop faster than the ICE car? We've just done some analysis using our future valuations and future projections, and we don't think they are. The data is telling us that actually your bigger volume electric cars at 4 or 5 years old will be worth either the same, excuse me, or they will depreciate by either the same or even slightly less than their petrol equivalent. So over 3 years, between sort of 4 years to 7 or 5 to 8, your electric car comes in at roughly the same price and it loses less money than the petrol. So as a driver, great news. Different story in new to 3. So the reason that those prices or those cars are more affordable, of course, is because they have dropped in value from new and through the younger years. And that is where there is some cause for concern, because that's where we see the steepest and fastest rates of depreciation. And that is where, of course, there's more returning supply. So there is the used market overall healthy, especially in 4+, but in those younger ones, there is some cause for concern. I guess, what does that mean for retailers? Again, more granular than ever. looking at, if you're thinking about bringing a 2-3 year old electric car in, really look at the value of that car, how quickly you think it can sell, and at what sort of price. Those ones are going to take more thinking around, and the decisions you make will be important.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, all of your data and all of your insights can give dealers exactly
Yeah.
that kind of info, can't it? So brilliant. Well, there's a huge amount there to digest. We should have you on more often, really should. But,
I'm not sure.
for today, Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure, James. Hope to see you again soon.
Well, that's it for today's Car Dealer Live. Join us again very soon. Bye bye.